Hollywood's golden age painted a glittering dream, but behind the bright studio lights, many big stars slipped into crushing debt. Taxes, bad contracts, drinking, drugs, or a single scandal could wipe out fortunes that once seemed endless. In this list, we remember 20 famous actors who still drew crowds, but left the world almost penniless. Their stories show how quickly fame fades and why smart money management mattered even in the 1930s to 50s. 1. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi terrified audiences as Count Dracula, creating one of cinema's most iconic monsters. His thick Hungarian accent, hypnotic stare, and elegant cape swirling became instantly recognizable worldwide. Yet the role that made him famous also became his prison. Studio executives quickly typecast Lugosi, offering him only monster parts that paid less with each passing year. As better horror roles went to Boris Karloff, Lugosi's career spiraled downward into increasingly embarrassing B-movies. By the 1950s, he was reduced to appearing in Ed Wood's notoriously awful films like Glen or Glenda and Bride of the Monster for just a few $100s per picture. Behind the scenes, Lugosi battled severe morphine addiction, the result of treatments for painful sciatica from his early theater days. Multiple rehab attempts drained what little savings he had. Adding to his financial woes were 5 marriages and subsequent divorces, each one taking another chunk of his dwindling assets. When Lugosi died in 1956, his final estate was valued at just $1,900, approximately $20,000 in today's money. Hope Lininger, his 5th and final wife, couldn't afford proper funeral expenses. Frank Sinatra, a longtime admirer, quietly paid some bills while Lugosi was buried in his iconic Dracula cape, the one possession he had insisted on keeping through all his hardships. 2. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's angelic voice carried over the rainbow into American hearts forever, but her own story held no pot of gold. From childhood, the studio system exploited her mercilessly. MGM executives forced teenage Judy onto amphetamines to control her weight and barbiturates to help her sleep, beginning a lifelong struggle with addiction. Financial troubles plagued Garland throughout her adult life. Her earnings were chronically mismanaged, first by her mother and later by a series of agents and husbands who made poor decisions with her money. The IRS pursued her relentlessly for unpaid taxes, eventually seizing most of her assets and forcing her to live on cash payments from small club performances. By her final years, Garland was essentially homeless, moving between hotels in London when she couldn't afford rent. Her financial situation became so desperate that she sometimes performed in tiny venues just to pay for groceries and basic necessities. When she died of an accidental overdose in 1969, she was renting a small London bathroom while drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Mickey Rooney, her friend and frequent co-star, later revealed she didn't have a dime, not a dime. Frank Sinatra, again showing remarkable generosity to fallen stars, paid for her funeral services. 3. Veronica Lake. With her trademark peekaboo blonde hairstyle covering one eye, Veronica Lake embodied 1940s glamour and inspired women worldwide to adopt her look. Paired with Alan Ladd in noir classics like This Gun for Hire, Lake became one of Paramount's most bankable stars. Her decline came swiftly. A combination of alcoholism, mental health issues, and a difficult reputation made studios reluctant to hire her. By 1951, Lake had hit rock bottom financially, filing for bankruptcy. She lost her Hollywood home and virtually all her possessions. Desperate for income, Lake took jobs as a barmaid in New York hotels, working under the name Connie de Toth to avoid recognition from former fans. A journalist eventually exposed her whereabouts, writing a story headlined "Veronica Lake Working as Cocktail Waitress." Her final years were spent in poverty, occasionally appearing in low-budget stage productions. Lake died of hepatitis and kidney failure at just 50 years old in 1973. Her ashes remained at a Vermont funeral home for 3 years because no one claimed them or paid the cremation bill. 30. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre's distinctive bulging eyes and soft, menacing voice made him unforgettable in classics like M, Casablanca, and The Maltese Falcon. Despite steady work in major films, Lorre's financial situation deteriorated throughout the 1940s due to mounting medical bills and a costly morphine addiction that began after emergency gallbladder surgery. The addiction spiraled out of control, with Lorre sometimes spending hundreds of dollars weekly on drugs, an enormous sum in the 1940s. His first wife, Celia Lovsky, later revealed he sometimes spent his entire paycheck on morphine within days of receiving it. By 1949, Lorre was forced to declare bankruptcy, listing debts of over $27,000 against minimal assets. Though he continued working in films and television through the 1950s, including memorable appearances on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, he never recovered financially. When Lorre died of a stroke in 1964, he was living in a modest Los Angeles apartment. His friend Vincent Price told reporters that Lorre had died virtually penniless. The funeral expenses were covered by a collection taken up among Hollywood colleagues who remembered his brilliance. 5. John Barrymore. John Barrymore came from America's most prestigious acting family and was considered the finest Hamlet of his generation. His chiseled features earned him the nickname the Great Profile, and in the 1920s and early 1930s, he commanded astronomical salaries both on stage and in silent and talking pictures. Yet Barrymore's legendary alcoholism and extravagant lifestyle consistently outpaced his enormous earnings. He maintained multiple expensive properties, including his beloved yacht Infanta, which cost a fortune to staff and maintain. His drinking habit required frequent hospital stays for detoxification, further draining his resources. By 1937, Barrymore's finances had collapsed entirely. He filed for bankruptcy protection, listing debts of approximately $160,000, equivalent to about $3.2 million today. The court documents revealed he had only $55,000 in assets against these substantial liabilities. His final years were spent in humiliating small roles that mocked his former greatness and declining health. When Barrymore died of cirrhosis and kidney failure in 1942, he left virtually nothing to his 4 ex-wives or children. Friends reported that he owned little more than his clothing and a few personal mementos from his illustrious stage career. 6. Marie Prevost. Marie Prevost charmed silent film audiences with her vivacious personality and comedic timing in Mack Sennett's Bathing Beauties series before graduating to starring roles in features. When talkies arrived in the late 1920s, Prevost's career faltered, not because of her voice, which was adequate, but because changing tastes favored different types of actresses. As roles dwindled, Prevost fell into deep depression and alcoholism. Her weight fluctuated dramatically, further limiting her casting opportunities in image-conscious Hollywood. She attempted crash diets that damaged her health while drinking heavily to cope with her career collapse. By 1934, Prevost was reduced to bit parts that sometimes didn't even warrant a screen credit. Her finances completely exhausted, she moved into a shabby apartment where neighbors later reported hearing her crying through the thin walls. In January 1937, Prevost was found dead in her apartment, having died several days earlier. The cause was acute alcoholism and malnutrition. She had been so impoverished that she couldn't afford food. Her small dog had desperately bitten her legs after her death, trying to wake her. She was just 38 years old. A collection among film industry workers paid for her funeral. 7. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge made history as the first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Academy Award for her role in Carmen Jones, 1954. This breakthrough should have secured her financial future, but racism limited her opportunities even at the height of her fame. Dandridge's finances were further compromised by dishonest business managers who embezzled much of her earning. Her marriage to restaurant owner Jack Dennison proved financially disastrous when their venture failed, leaving her responsible for significant business debts. By 1960, Dandridge was forced to file for bankruptcy. The IRS placed tax liens against her for $139,000 in back taxes. Desperate for money, she sold her Hollywood home and moved into a small apartment. She attempted a nightclub comeback, but bookings were sparse. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge was found dead in her apartment from an antidepressant overdose at age 42. Her estate was valued at just $2,000, and she had less than $2 in her bank account. 8. Rosco "Fatty" Arbuckle. Rosco "Fatty" Arbuckle was one of silent cinema's first superstars, earning an unprecedented $1 million annual contract with Paramount in 1918, equivalent to about $18 million today. His acrobatic comedy influenced generations of performers, including Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Everything changed in September 1921 when Arbuckle was accused of manslaughter following the death of actress Virginia Rapp at a party he hosted. Though he was eventually acquitted after 3 trials, the scandal destroyed his career overnight. Major studios banned his films, and his contract was canceled. The legal defense drained Arbuckle's fortune. Though the ban was technically lifted in 1932, allowing him to direct under the pseudonym William Goodrich, he never recovered financially. Attempts at a comeback were cut short when he died of a heart attack in 1933, leaving almost nothing in his estate. Buster Keaton, who remained loyal throughout the scandal, later said, "Rosco and I were close friends. The day he was acquitted, we walked out of that courtroom and he was dead. He was never the same." 9. Bobby Driscoll. Bobby Driscoll was Hollywood's golden child of the late 1940s, starring in Disney classics like Song of the South, Treasure Island, and providing the voice and live-action reference for Peter Pan. Walt Disney himself called Driscoll the living embodiment of his own youth and signed him to an exclusive contract. As Driscoll entered adolescence, acne and changing looks led Disney to drop him unceremoniously in 1953. The teenage star found himself blacklisted when other studios assumed he must have done something terrible for Disney to terminate his contract so abruptly. Unemployment, drug addiction, and multiple arrests followed. Driscoll burned through his childhood earnings and developed a heroin habit that further destroyed his prospects. By his 20s, he was homeless and destitute, his Academy Juvenile Award long since pawned for drug money. In March 1968, 2 children playing in an abandoned New York tenement discovered Driscoll's body. With no identification, he was buried as an unknown person in a pauper's grave on Hart Island. His identity wasn't confirmed until almost 2 years later when his mother sought help from the Disney studio to locate him. Dishonte Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn's dashing looks and athletic prowess made him the definitive Hollywood action hero of the 1930s and 1940s. Films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood brought him enormous wealth, which he spent as quickly as he earned it. Flynn's expenditures were legendary. Multiple properties, a yacht, constant parties, and endless legal troubles from paternity suits and assault allegations. His famous quip, "I've spent 90% of my money on women, booze, and gambling, and wasted the other 10%, wasn't far from the truth. Failed business ventures accelerated his financial decline. Flynn invested heavily in a failed meatpacking business in Cuba just before Castro's revolution. He also sank money into an unsuccessful film production company and dubious mining operations. By 1959, Flynn was reduced to leasing his beloved yacht, Zaka, to make ends meet. While in Vancouver negotiating such a lease, he suffered a fatal heart attack at 50. Though not completely destitute at death, his estate was entangled in debts, tax problems, and multiple claims from ex-wives and children that consumed most of its value. 11th, Florence Lawrence. Florence Lawrence holds the distinction of being the world's first true movie star, the first film actress known to audiences by name. Before her, studios kept performers anonymous to prevent them from demanding higher salaries. When the public discovered her identity in 1910, she achieved unprecedented fame. At her peak, Lawrence earned the equivalent of millions in today's dollars and received over 1,000 fan letters weekly. She starred in nearly 300 films for various studios, but her fortune wouldn't last. A series of catastrophes destroyed Lawrence's finances, bad investments, 2 divorces, and a devastating fire at her cosmetics factory that wasn't properly insured. The transition to sound films in the late 1920s left her career in ruins as studios sought younger faces. By 1938, Lawrence was selling cosmetics door to door and living in a small Hollywood apartment. Suffering from a painful chronic bone disorder and facing destitution, she swallowed ant poison mixed with cough syrup, leaving a note that read, "I am tired of it all." The Motion Picture Relief Fund paid for a simple burial. Lawrence's grave remained unmarked until 1991, when an anonymous fan finally purchased a headstone that acknowledged her historical importance. The first movie star. On Ikinchi Olive Bordon. Olive Bordon's stunning dark beauty earned her the nickname the Joy Girl after her hit 1927 film of the same name. At her peak with Fox Film Corporation, she commanded $1,500 weekly, approximately $23,000 in today's money, and lived in a mansion staffed with servants. Bordon's downfall began when she demanded an even higher salary, prompting Fox to terminate her contract. Though she found work at smaller studios, the transition to talkies revealed limitations in her acting range. As roles disappeared, alcoholism took hold. By the early 1930s, Bordon was broke and working as an extra for $7.50 per day, sometimes on sets where she had once been the star. Her mother's death in 1945 sent her into a deeper spiral of drinking and depression. In 1947, journalists found Bordon working at a Los Angeles Salvation Army mission, where she cleaned floors and served food under the name Sister Ollie. She told reporters she had found peace in religion after losing everything. Bordon died that same year from pneumonia and liver failure at just 41. Her estate consisted of a few pieces of clothing and a well-worn Bible. Her funeral expenses were covered by the Motion Picture Relief Fund. 13th baby Peggy. Diana Sarah Carey, known to the world as Baby Peggy, was one of Hollywood's first child stars. By age 10, she had made over 150 short films and features, earning $1 million annually in the early 1920s, an astronomical sum equivalent to roughly $15 million today. Despite this incredible income, Peggy never saw most of her money. Her father, a former cowboy with no financial acumen, served as her manager and squandered her earnings on luxury cars and a failed dude ranch investment in Wyoming. When Peggy's contract collapsed after her father argued with producers, the family's income vanished overnight. They were reduced to sleeping in cheap hotels and working as movie extras for a few dollars daily. In her memoir, Carey recalled being destitute and broke before she turned 12. Unlike many child stars, Carey survived her early exploitation and poverty. She reinvented herself as an author and historian, writing books about Hollywood's mistreatment of child performers. She lived to be 101 years old, passing away in 2020 after decades of advocating for child actors' rights and financial protections. 14. Barbara Payton. Barbara Payton's rise in Hollywood was meteoric. By 1950, the stunning blonde was earning $10,000 weekly starring opposite James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye. Studio publicity touted her as the next Lana Turner, and she lived in a mansion in Malibu Beach. Her fall was equally swift, a scandalous love triangle with actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, which culminated in a violent brawl leaving Tone hospitalized, made Payton toxic in image-conscious Hollywood. Studios canceled her contracts, and by 1955, she couldn't find work at any price. Alcoholism and drug addiction accelerated her decline. By the early 1960s, Payton was working as a $5 prostitute on Sunset Boulevard, sometimes sleeping behind dumpsters when she couldn't afford a room. Her once beautiful face became unrecognizable from street fights, excessive drinking, and poor nutrition. In 1967, with her liver failing, Payton moved into her parents' modest San Diego home. She died there at 39, leaving nothing but pawn tickets and unpaid hospital bills. A former co-star paid for her cremation. 15. Hoot Gibson. Hoot Gibson transitioned from real-life rodeo champion to Western movie star in the 1920s, bringing authentic writing skills to his films. Audiences loved his gee-whiz grin and spectacular stunts, making him one of Universal's highest-paid actors with earnings exceeding $14,000 weekly. Gibson's financial troubles stemmed from his passion for high-risk investments. He sank millions into aviation companies, thoroughbred horses, and ranches, all of which failed spectacularly. The 1929 stock market crash wiped out much of his remaining capital. By the 1940s, Gibson was reduced to performing in traveling rodeo shows and making appearances at county fairs. When cancer struck in the late 1950s, the IRS had already seized his last property, a modest horse farm in Southern California, for unpaid taxes. Gibson spent his final weeks in the Motion Picture Country Home, a charity facility for destitute film industry workers. When he died penniless in 1962, fellow Western stars like Gene Autry contributed to a collection for funeral expenses. 16th Nita Naldi. Nita Naldi's exotic beauty made her the perfect vamp in silent films, most famously opposite Rudolph Valentino in Blood and Sand. Known for her revealing costumes and smoldering sexuality on screen, Naldi lived extravagantly off-screen as well, developing an insatiable appetite for furs, jewels, and designer clothes. The arrival of talkies coincided with changing beauty standards, leaving Naldi's career in tatters. Her heavy Brooklyn accent proved unsuitable for her exotic screen persona, and producers sought younger actresses. Legal battles with former associates drained her remaining resources. The Great Depression delivered the final blow to Naldi's finances. In 1932, she filed for bankruptcy, listing debts of $12,000 against assets of just $400. She moved into a modest Manhattan hotel room, occasionally giving newspaper interviews about the good old days for small fees. Naldi remained in that hotel for nearly 30 years, gradually selling her remaining jewelry and gowns to pay rent. When she died in 1961, her only possessions were a few photographs and mementos from her brief time as a star. 17. Annabelle Moore. Annabelle Moore, sometimes known as Annabelle Whitford, holds a unique place in cinema history. Her butterfly dance, with colorful swirling skirts filmed by Thomas Edison's company in 1896, represents one of the earliest examples of hand-tinted film. These short films were so popular that she became the original motion picture pinup girl, with her image reproduced on cards and posters nationwide. Moore's fame expanded when illustrator Charles Dana Gibson used her as the model for his famous Gibson Girl drawings, the idealized American beauty of the early 1900s. She headlined the Ziegfeld Follies and appeared in Broadway productions, commanding top salaries. As newer dance crazes replaced her serpentine style and younger performers emerged, Moore's bookings decreased. Her marriage to Edward James Buchan in 1910 largely ended her performing career, and their subsequent divorce left her financially insecure. In her final decades, Moore lived quietly in Chicago, far from the spotlights that once illuminated her pioneering performances. When she died in 1961 at age 83, the New York Times noted she died penniless, a sad epilogue for cinema's first dancing star. 18. Lois Weber. Lois Weber wasn't just any filmmaker. She was America's first major female director and one of the highest-paid directors in Hollywood during the 1910s. Her socially conscious films tackled controversial subjects like birth control, poverty, and drug addiction at a time when most movies offered simple entertainment. At her peak, Weber ran her own production studio and earned $5,000 weekly, an extraordinary sum for the era and more than many male directors. Her 1915 film Hypocrites featured the first full-frontal female nudity in American cinema, artfully presented as an allegorical truth figure, demonstrating her fearless approach. Weber's career collapsed when she lost control of her production company in the early 1920s. A divorce from husband Philip Smalley further complicated her finances, and chronic illness made steady work impossible. By 1939, Weber was living in poverty. When she was hospitalized with a bleeding ulcer, she couldn't afford proper treatment. She died destitute, with funeral expenses covered by the Directors Guild and former colleagues who remembered her groundbreaking contributions to cinema. Today, film historians recognize Weber as one of silent cinema's most significant innovators, but her financial ruin and obscurity in her final years reflect how easily the industry discarded even its most accomplished pioneers. 19th. Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino's smoldering gaze caused women to faint in theater aisles during screenings of The Sheik and Blood and Sand. At his peak, Valentino received over 10,000 fan letters weekly and earned approximately $10,000 weekly, making him one of the highest-paid actors of the silent era. Despite these enormous earnings, Valentino struggled financially throughout his brief stardom. Expensive divorces from Jean Acker and Natasha Rambova depleted his resources, while his taste for exotic cars, lavish homes, and imported furnishings kept him perpetually cash-strapped. Legal battles with studios over contract disputes further drained his finances. When Valentino collapsed in New York's Hotel Ambassador in August 1926, his primary concern was about negative publicity, not his mounting debts. After his death at just 31 from peritonitis and pleuritis, it became clear that Valentino had minimal liquid assets despite his fame. His estate couldn't afford a permanent burial place. June Mathis, a screenwriter friend, offered her family crypt as a temporary resting place. But Valentino remains there nearly a century later, never having received the mausoleum his stardom seemed to promise. Dadiata Vellesca Surat. Vellesca Surat rivaled Theda Bara as silent cinema's premier vamp character, specializing in roles as the dangerous, exotic woman who lured men to their doom. Her flame dance and elaborately beaded gowns made her a fashion icon in the 1910s. In a tragic twist of film preservation history, all 11 of Surat's feature films for Fox are now considered lost, destroyed in vault fires, or through decomposition of unstable nitrate film stock. Not a single complete performance survives, making her perhaps the most significant vanished star of the silent era. Surat's career ended abruptly after she filed a plagiarism lawsuit against screenwriter D.W. Griffith in 1917, claiming he stole a script she had submitted. The powerful Griffith effectively blacklisted her, and she never worked in films again. In subsequent decades, Surat drifted between cheap hotels, occasionally selling costume jewelry pieces that were once worth thousands. By the 1940s, she had developed an obsession with Christian Science and became increasingly reclusive. She spent her final years in a Washington, D.C. nursing home, virtually forgotten by the industry that once celebrated her exotic appeal. When she died in 1962, newspaper obituaries noted she passed penniless. Her ashes were placed in an unmarked grave beside her mother in Indiana. These 20 stories reveal common patterns that led stars from wealth to poverty. The studio system often exploited performers, paying enormous salaries but offering little financial guidance. Many stars developed substance abuse problems, partly due to the pressure of fame, and sometimes because studios actually encouraged drug use to maintain grueling production schedules. The transition from silent films to talkies proved catastrophically expensive for actors with unsuitable voices or accents. Others found themselves suddenly too old as beauty standards changed. The precarious nature of fame itself, how quickly adoration could turn to indifference, left many unprepared for career downturns. Perhaps most importantly, these cautionary tales demonstrate how tax problems, divorces, and poor investments could quickly erase even the largest fortunes. Without modern financial protections like retirement accounts and Social Security, aging stars often had absolutely nothing to fall back on when work disappeared. Today's Screen Actors Guild and various entertainment industry foundations exist partly because of these tragic stories, created to ensure that no performer, however momentarily forgotten, would ever again die in such desperate circumstances.